So, Andrew, you and I will be meeting up in real life in just over a week.
Yes, yeah,
First time in a while. In fact, if memory serves, the last time you and I were together in the flesh, you pitched this podcast to me.
that is right. That is
And
actually true.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. And so ever since then, it's been a year and a half of falling into constant rabbit holes about infanticide and incest and castration, you name it. So couldn't be more grateful.
Yes.
You've got a high bar.
Right.
But I was thinking our upcoming trip. I've been thinking back on some of the travels you and I have done over the years, over the decades, really.
Yeah.
And I have a new
Yeah.
theory. I think these trips were all in their own way foreshadowing this second season of God versus God.
Interesting.
So hear me out. Shortly after college, you'll recall, you and I went to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And I think we both did pretty well at the Luxor, which of course is a Egyptian themed casino and hotel.
Right.
Now, this was like early 1998. So it was not that far removed from actual ancient Egypt. It was that far back.
All right.
But we did okay there. And then just over a decade later, we met up in Memphis, which of course we now know is named after a city in ancient Egypt.
True.
And on top of all that, in about a week and a half, you and I will be gathering in beautiful Cleveland, Ohio,
Right.
where we will presumably visit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which of course is shaped like, you guessed it, a pyramid.
No.
So this all seems like a coincidence to the casual listener. I don't want to call it like a conspiracy, but I mean, let's face it, we've been dropping hints at this since for some decades, since at least many of my coworkers before they were even born. So it's a long time coming.
Right.
So I look forward not only to spending time together again, but to continuing this very slow, very subtle tradition of foreshadowing over many decades to come. Anything you would care to add before we jump in?
Oh yeah, well, it's funny you meant actually, since you're mentioning travel, because we're off of our usually rigorous every 3 to 6 week schedule.
Yes.
Because we both were taking separate trips,
Yes.
scouting locations for the eventual season 2 finale. You in New York and myself in London. So I was a little bit nearer to actual Egypt, though not quite the full way there, but
closer,
dipping my toes in that direction.
Yeah.
And I did see some Egyptian artifacts. Gained, I'm sure, completely above board by the British Imperial
100%. Yeah,
officials,
full transparency,
no doubt. Right, including an obelisk that's hanging out on the Thames shoreline.
Oh yeah,
and then the Egyptomania store in Camden Market. None of which the items were actually made in Egypt that I could find, but
certainly not. No.
And also when I was there, I want to say I saw a lot of references to our special Christmas episode, whereas you'll recall the Puritans banned Christmas,
of course,
and possibly put Santa Claus on trial.
Right.
So when I went to the Tower of London on a tour, but unfortunately the tour guide didn't have any information on which rooms that Santa would have been held in. He pretended to have completely ignorant of the topic when I asked him about it. So.
I'm sure that is well orchestrated. I'm sure he has his talking points, and that those are not among them.
Yeah, some topics are just too sensitive to talk about, even 400 years later. But
well, good on you for trying. You can't beat the effort since we went that far. Good on you.
All right, so I think that's what I have.
Okay, well then let's without further ado, let's jump in. So welcome, folks. God versus God, season 2, episode 4, Sobek versus Isis. Quite a matchup, I think, this time. And as always, of course, may the best God win. So I'm going to start with Sobek, God of the Nile, figure of great strength, great power. I would say we'll learn in this episode his nature. It's described as complex, for sure. Complex and elastic, both. Like Velcro, just it keeps changing. You never quite pin it down. And before I say anything about him, I feel this is a good time to go straight into the image description feature that we've been doing. So I'm going to pull up an image here on the screen that you will see.
Oh yeah, I see
of Sobek. So for the folks at home who lack the visual dimension of this broadcast, please describe, if you will, what you see in this image of the iconography of Sobek.
All right. So what I'm seeing before me is again the traditional Egyptian pose. We see the shoulders
Yes.
facing towards us and the feet going on the side of a man's body,
Yes.
with the head of a crocodile, I believe, or
Yes.
maybe an alligator. My skills aren't that advanced in
Yeah.
telling the difference, but I'm guessing a crocodile. And then on the top of the head of the crocodile is what appears to either be a couple ears of corn
Mm,
or maybe a high-rise building with
right.
and then I think two snakes guarding
Okay.
it. And then he's got maybe being held up by some reeds.
Yep.
And he also is holding that traditional Ankh, the symbol of life,
Of course.
and the chaos headed ruler symbol of rule.
That is
Uh,
correct.
and yeah, so how'd I do?
You
Anything I
did very
missed?
well. No, as always. So well done. You called the crocodile head appropriately, and that is a crocodile. There are
Yeah.
subtle differences between the alligator and the crocodile. The shape of their snouts. They're little crocodile's a little more pointy, alligator's a little more wavy.
Yeah.
So crocodile is correct. And yeah, that crocodile head on a man's body really does cut quite a figure. It's almost impossible to mistake for anybody else. So, like a number of animal related deities that we've talked about, including Set from our previous episode, he is pictured in two different ways. So here we see the crocodile head on the man's body, as you said, but oftentimes Sobek is also depicted just as a crocodile. So we're going to get both. This is the traditional version as far as the man's body goes. You mentioned the crown. So yes, those are not stalks of ears of corn, nor are they high-rise buildings. I believe neither of those items were at least available to the ancient Egyptians.
That's true, yeah.
But it is an Atef crown, as we talked about before. It's got the what you would look like stalks are actually twisted ram horns, which are part of that traditional crown as well. Those are inspired by Osiris, who god of the dead, of course. We covered him earlier, husband of Isis, who will be part of our discussion in this episode. And your eagle eye did point out two little mini snakes on either side of the crown. So those are like little mini cobras, something called the uraeus. That is a symbol as part of the crown of sovereignty, royalty, deity, all that stuff, saying, I can only wear this because I am large and in charge. Between those, there is a small solar disk. I'm not sure if you caught that. So that is, of course, a tiny version, but reminiscent of Ra, who, of course, has the large version, the sun god, for episode 1. So all these symbols are going to factor in as we hear this story.
Okay.
Because in some way, Sobek did have some sort of interaction or even merged being with many of the aspects of these gods. So much more to come. You pointed out the Waz scepter, the Ankh in the hand, the tail, non-erect, and of course that form-fitting, delightful golden man skirt that all these figures are wearing, and they're all in pretty good shape. I got to say, I mean, we haven't really mentioned this, but everyone's looking real cut. I guess
that's true.
They're going to have that, but they must be eating well, getting their exercise. So apart from that association with the crocodile, very hard to miss. Sobek also known for a number of things. So he's got some special powers. He's got what we call pharaonic power. So that is the sort of the source of power that is gained by the pharaohs over the years. They all look back to this sort of initial power that he has. Also fertility. Well, here he's big into his own fertile self, his fecundity. Military prowess. A lot of his might translates into protection of soldiers. And that he's mostly known as a protector deity. So he is the one who will protect you from everything that is wrong. He will use something called apotropaic powers. Now, that is a special kind of magic.
Wow. Yeah.
I needed some to pronounce that correctly, and I used it wisely. But that is essentially, there's a whole series of bad stuff that got grouped into what was called the evil eye. And this is Egyptian, but it also translates into other traditions. And this type of magic will just sort of neutralize that evil eye. So over time, it kind of worked its way down, got diluted into essentially superstitions. So things like crossing your fingers, knocking on wood, those are very mild forms of apotropaic magic.
Okay.
But Sobek predates all that. He used these very real magical powers from their source to protect Egyptians against the many dangers of the Nile River, of which he is associated. So you might think what's the most dangerous part of the Nile River? Well, my first instinct would be those nasty crocodiles. So
Right, sure.
clearly he's playing a complex role here. He is both the crocodile and he's protecting you from these dangerous crocodiles.
Right.
As much as he protects against those crocs, he's also known for everything in the Nile being dangerous. He is also, we'll learn, being given credit for creating the Nile River. So again, he made the thing that causes the danger,
right,
against which he will protect you. A bit of a racket going on there, but as I said, it's complex. He's layered. So origins, Sobek goes way back. I mean, about as old school as they get. His story begins way in the old kingdom of Egypt. One of the sons of Set, one of a subject in episode 3.
right.
Another was Neith, who was one of Set's many consorts. She was the ancient goddess of creation. And Sobek's tradition starts very small, very modestly. He's kind of more of a local god, like a minor leaguer of sorts, not terribly significant, kind of a local figure. But he does start to show up in a number of the ancient pyramid texts, which we've talked about. So over time, the tradition builds, and we will find that his arc goes all the way from the beginning to the end. So long-lasting tradition. People are still talking about him, still worshiping Sobek up until the Roman period. So we're talking about a 2,000-year stretch of renowned and increasing in importance over those 2,000 years. So start small, but you'll see he goes to some very big places. The name Sobek, you will not be surprised to hear, has Egyptian origins. So originally known as, now again,
say that again.
Vowels in hieroglyphics. So for our purposes, we're going to go with Sobek just to make it more palatable for us and for the listeners. Sobek it is. The meaning of the name. So the name is derived from the verb meaning to impregnate. So in our culture today, I believe that is pronounced Nick Cannon. But to impregnate was Sobek back then, and that was his name from the beginning. So starts in the old days, but it really starts to take off in the Middle Kingdom, thanks essentially to having this one super fan in a very high position. So it is the pharaoh Amenemhet III. This pharaoh was essentially such a big fan of this particular god. He was like the president of the Sobek fan club. While he was in charge, he spearheaded all kinds of projects to promote his favorite deity. He had, that era, you see tons of crocodile statues, lots of dedicated temples. He even had a special Sobek temple connected to his own pyramid, the pharaoh did. So that is what a big deal he was to the pharaoh. It seems excessive, but because of all that pharaoh fandom, it really did raise Sobek's profile, and it became very popular among everybody in Egypt. And after this boost in popularity, this is where he starts to really level up by fusing himself with other gods. So we start to see some of this, and you alluded to it even in the first one, and in Ra, how there are some of these gods that kind of come together, they become one. He was really, really into this. So he first experiments with this by becoming fused with Horus, who of course is the falcon-headed god of divine kingship. We heard about his misadventures with Set. They were detailed in grotesque levels in our last episode. Even now, I can't look at salad the same way. But the falcon-headed god Horus, when they become fused, now Sobek becomes promoted to this new level, sort of the major leagues, this divine triad that includes him and his parents, Osiris and Isis, whom we'll hear from in the second half of this program. So he really is building this tradition, and through Horus becomes part of this sort of equivalent of the Holy Trinity. And so for some time, Sobek is essentially this dual crocodile and falcon god, Sobek Horus.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. I mean, talk about complexity and prominence. A guy with a crocodile head is imposing enough, but now he's part crocodile, part falcon. I don't know about you. I wouldn't mess with him.
No, definitely not.
So later still, we get to the New Kingdom. Sobek now becomes so popular, he gets the ultimate promotion, calls up to the show, and he fuses with the primary sun god himself, Ra, from episode 1. So he now becomes Sobek Ra, and as such, he's got his crocodile form, but he wears these two symbols, the solar disk, the little cobras. And now he's more than just a protector. He's not just this beacon of fertility. He becomes the creator who rose from the dark primeval waters, formed the gods and the rest of the world. So talk about, a raise in stature. Now, in that telling, when he was working hard to create the world as also Ra, he worked up a sweat. The sweat ran down his brow and then down his back in this flowing stream. And that stream of sweat became the Nile River. That was where it came from. And I'm especially impressed by this because the fact that the sweat of his creation actually accomplishes more creation is really like just an impressive level of work. I don't know about you. In my case, sweat typically creates only embarrassment, maybe laundry,
odor.
but yes, but rarely anything productive. But not the case with Sobek. That's where the Nile River comes from. And so, yeah, now that Sobek and Ra become one, he's the creator god, and they start singing about him. So Egyptians have this cycle of hymns in his honor. So because of the singing, becomes an even more massive celebrity. There is a little bit of controversy in his rise. Okay. Now, we just assume all this must be divine intervention, that these gods are coming together. Some suggested that this merger with Ra was actually a bit of an inside job. So it was an artificial power play by the priests of Sobek, who thought they would gain more of the upper hand during that period if they connected him with Ra. Now, that's what they say. You and I both know that the idea of any leader using religious figures to gain political power would never happen. Right. Preposterous.
No.
So I don't buy it for a second, but that is some of the rumors swirling around. So
right.
Never again, never since. So he's got lots of cult centers all throughout Egypt as a result of this wave of popularity. Fayum is the name of the region. In particular, the capital of that region is really his sort of the center of his worship, which has the delightful name of Crocodiliopolis for the crocodile.
Yeah.
Now you would think,
City.
That's right, Croctown. You would think a figure of this popularity would be likable, charismatic, but I'm afraid you would be wrong. At least, well, that wouldn't tell the whole story, which is again complex. So Sobek is known to be rough, aggressive, vicious, not unlike, as you would guess, a crocodile. Sure. In fact, it turns out the crocodiles from the Nile, and this is, I guess, still said to be true, have a special reputation for being particularly rough. Like that, the Nile variety itself, they can do things others can't. So they've got very strong stomachs that allow them to eat both living and rotting flesh, whichever they prefer. So they're able to have a nice, robust variety of diet. Yeah. They also are known for being rather strategic. They will sometimes kill an animal for food, but they will bury it and save it for later. So that will feed into Sobek's association with death and rebirth, which comes in a little later. But yeah, like those Nile crocodiles, Sobek known for being ferocious, moving quickly, having this bit of a chaotic streak. There's a particular spell from the pyramid text that I think describes this well. It's talking about a pharaoh, but essentially describing Sobek, and I'll paraphrase. He is green of plumage, with alert face and raised lore, the splashing one. He will eat with his mouth. He will copulate with his penis. He is lord of seamen who takes women from their husbands to the place he likes, according to his heart's fancy. So very specific.
Yeah.
Bit of a tough character, you could say. Takes what he wants.
Yeah.
Clearly revels in his own sense of fecundity. The other kind of epithets you hear about Sobek, they make him out to be a real piece of work. So one is he who loves robbery, which, based on that description makes sense. That tracks. He was also known as pointed of teeth, which again is a crocodile.
Yeah.
Checks out. But I think the most memorable one, the epithet is he who eats while he also mates. Now, this is interesting. We immediately are reminded of another mythical figure from a much later era, of course, George Costanza, the contemporary god of, pettiness, lassitude. And of course, in one episode, he was known to prepare himself a sandwich for his own enjoyment immediately following the act of lovemaking. Sobek takes it a step further. He apparently just chows right down in the middle of his romantic action. So doesn't even wait to be finished, just gets down to eating while he's getting down to business. Quirky, complex.
Yeah.
Now, these are all rather rough aspects of character. It's not all bad because of his fusion with Horus. I guess retroactively becomes part of the story we told in episode 2, where, of course, Osiris is killed by Set, cut into 16 pieces, this beloved king. So as part of this sort of retroactive story, Sobek ends up getting credit to be the one who healed Osiris by putting him back together. So this leads to a very specific nickname, which is he who unites the dismembered limbs of Osiris, which, again, very good in its specificity. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but he's beloved for that. Good improvement to his reputation at that point. I mean, you're thinking one minute he's known for, I guess, urinating and having dinner during acts of romance. The next, he's magically reconstructing a beloved king piece by piece. So continuing this upswing of stature. And with this change, he becomes known as the ultimate protector deity. He's got the magic. He can put it all together. He can even heal a broken king. So with that, he uses his magic, wards off evil, defends the innocent, sticks up for the little guy. And of course, this transfers to the military as well, where soldiers, when they're wounded in battle, or even killed, he's going to use that magic to restore them to their previous health. He will bring back their sight, their senses, even in some case, brings back their lives. But even with all these variations, multiple gods, multiple dimensions, Sobek always found a way to just stay on brand with his worshipers. And of course, that always came down to the crocodile. So it was very common to leave a votive offering for a god at a temple when you're in the midst of worshiping. At some point, there were a few fans of Sobek who really felt strongly about taking the bodies of actual crocodiles, preserving them as mummies, and then leaving those mummy crocodiles as offerings at his cultic centers. So people then competed, not to be outdone. Some worshipers would not just do that. They would mummify the eggs of crocodiles, and they would leave that at the foot of the temple as a sort of note to the cyclical nature of death and rebirth with his association with Ra. Then you've got people who are raising crocodiles, treating them like sacred animals. Sometimes it's happening in people, in the temple itself. They're considering the crocodile to be an incarnation, like a living version of Sobek. And then after they died,
pet crocodiles.
I hesitate to use the word pet because I think they let them alone, but they certainly did not mess with them. And when they died of natural causes, then they would give them the full mummy treatment. And unsurprisingly, most of this happened in the main temple of Crocodiliopolis.
Yes.
Very fitting. So surprisingly, these mummies were discovered then thousands of years later, not too long ago from our current day, still in remarkable shape, having been mummified. In some cases, Sobek superfans would actually mummify crocodiles with baby crocodiles in their mouths or on their backs. Just everybody's trying to one up, do better performance art. But it had meaning too. Apparently, crocodiles are among the few reptiles that actually care about their young. Most of them don't. And they do, in fact, transport their offspring in this way, in their mouths or on their backs. So it is both biologically accurate, but it has that nice symbolism of Sobek being fierce, but also protective. Again, complex. So there is a crocodile museum in Egypt to this day. There's a collection of mummified crocodiles. As you can imagine, that is the main attraction. And around all this, we don't have a lot of stories about stuff that Sobek actually did. It was a lot of the people liked him. The fact that he was very popular. He attached himself to other powerful beings to gain the notoriety. So I think he was kind of among the first to be sort of, in our own times terms, famous for being famous. He was sort of a proto-Kardashianic figure, if you like. Yet, in wrapping it all up, this Sobek story is a remarkable rise, almost a sort of rags to riches. He was always a god, but he went from the minors to the show. Grew from this sort of humble local deity to becoming one with the creator, the top shelf, the sun god himself. Had, I think, both the dark side and a light, being sort of on one hand a wanton impregnator, on the other hand a divine protector, but had a good sense of how to pick the right partner, how to then fuse with them, become them. And the people ate it up, all the way down to raising and mummifying crocodiles and crocodile eggs, which, when you think about it, not an easy task at any step of that process. So that's commitment. So maybe Sobek was a vessel for the changing needs. He was around for 2,000 years, so times are bound to change, and he kind of kept up with the current day. Maybe he was a vehicle for some of those priests to gain political power as they lorded over their fancy local, crocodile mummy establishments. But one thing that you can't deny, in any case, he certainly over a long time meant a lot to a lot of people. And frankly, given his strength and vicious nature, if I ever had a problem with Sobek, I certainly would not say it to his big, long, toothy crocodile face. I can say that with confidence.
No.
So there it is. There is Sobek, god of the Nile, and many in all of his complexity and elasticity before you.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah.
So
interesting.
A formidable contestant, I think. Will certainly be interesting to hear in the categories how he fares due to that complexity, but we'll get there. In the meantime, let's take a breather, and we'll be right back with Isis in part 2.
We will.
All right.
And we are back for our second deity in this episode, and that is the goddess Isis. So we've met Isis before in the podcast a couple times. She played a significant supporting role for her husband / brother Osiris, and she opposed her other brother Set when he took on her son Horus in our last episode.
Yes.
But beyond these myths, Isis had a number of roles in Egyptian religion, and those roles generally expanded as time went on, much as we heard with Sobek. But there were a couple of near constants, which were her connection to motherhood, to magic, to healing, and the pharaohs and the royal family. So we're going to hear about all those coming up. Now, those are kind of near constants because the name Isis itself actually comes from the Egyptian word for throne. And the hieroglyphic version of that even has a little throne picture in it. And this has led to some speculation by at least some Egyptologists that Isis started her career, in fact, as a deified chair.
Wow.
Or a divine royal barca lounger.
So starting from lowly furniture.
Yeah, so you talk rags to riches. So that's possibly her story. Now, there's not a lot of evidence for actual chair worship among ancient Egyptians, but there is that definite linguistic connection. So it's possible.
Interesting.
So with that, I think we're going to go to our sharing of the image so that Matt can give everybody a description of Isis, and I'm actually going to show him two images, so we got double the pleasure here. All right, Matt, can you see that now?
Yes, I can. It is a very detailed image. So we're looking at it looks like a woman sitting in some kind of, looks like a somewhat difficult yoga position, sitting down. Looks like the right leg over the left. I'd have a hard time with that one. Torso still bent the other way, so she's getting a good stretch action out of that yoga pose. Arms outstretched, but clearly some very ornate wings coming from both left and right arm, patterned but very big, almost larger than her body itself. And it looks like typical sort of, almost like a headdress of some kind of cool headband. And I don't know if there's a little sort of a blocky object at the top of her head that looks like it might be connected as some kind of headpiece as well. And she's sitting on what looks to be some sort of early Egyptian running trampoline of some kind. Looks like it's got a little bounce to it, very ornate. And of course, in the background, all sorts of hieroglyphics and a very detailed, looks like a wallpaper behind her.
Right. That is correct. So this is an adaptation of an Egyptian tomb painting, sort of modernized.
Okay.
And she does indeed have the wings, which is something she wasn't always shown with, but I think became more prevalent later.
Yep.
And that is because of her association with the kite, the bird, the kite, not the stringed. And you talk about the headdress there, which is kind of I would describe it as a Tetris looking object.
Yes.
But that is in fact that throne. That is the hieroglyphic for a throne. Which is on her head. And so the trampoline that you're mentioning is also a throne. So she's sitting on a throne and she has a throne on her head. So she's
head throne, body throne. Her name comes from a throne. This is incredibly throne centric. I'm very impressed.
Yeah. So and there we have it. And I think hard to describe the position that she's in, but she is sort of kneeling on the throne, one foot underneath her and one sort of with the knee up to the side. I do think probably getting a good stretch after sitting on the throne all day.
No doubt. And even the sort of dress she's wearing, the bottom half kind of resembles almost some yoga pants, some Lululemons with a little bit of pattern on them. So those would be very much at home in the yoga circle.
Yeah, those would be very fashionable today. So, all right. So I'm going to give you the next image and see if you can see this.
Well, that sure looks like beloved actress Elizabeth Taylor.
That it is,
if I'm not mistaken, wearing what appears to be a very ornate gold fashioned outfit, gold, nice plunging neckline to show off some of Miss Taylor's assets, but also almost it looks like those the left and right shoulders, the gold coming down could be in the form of wings. Looks like almost a little scaly. Very ornate headdress coming up to the top, and it looks like almost a solar disc at the top, or the sort of base of the headdress.
Yes.
Almost like these sort of golden flames licking up to it, and then it looks like past the top frame of the picture looks like another sort of very high type of headpiece, but a lot of gold. Elizabeth Taylor looking fantastic, so it's a lovely picture, and yeah, good selection.
Right, yeah, I think you picked up the big items here. And I wanted to show this because this is Elizabeth Taylor in the movie Cleopatra.
Yeah.
Dressed as Cleopatra, dressed as Isis.
Okay, so little layers, it's a costume move. Yeah.
Going on there. But Cleopatra did, in fact, at times style herself as Isis and would dress up as the goddess. And that sun headdress, see that in the later days, Isis kind of moved on from the throne, and she borrowed from Hathor from episode 1 with the sun array. So that's that. And I'll put these up on our socials for the people.
Yes. For the multimedia experience.
Yes, for the multimedia experience. So if you're listening to this, you can look us up on the socials and get all these pictures and have it in your mind as we go through this episode.
Yes.
So back in the Osiris episode, because Osiris, he starts it, he's on a goodwill tour, and then he gets put in a box and he's nearly dead.
Yeah.
And then he comes back to life, and then he's extremely dead and finally undead.
Yes.
Because he's got a lot going on. It's really Isis who carried the action for Team Osiris since much of the time that he was either in a box or deceased.
Right.
When Osiris is closed up in the coffin and floated down the Nile, it is Isis along with her sister Nephthys who mourn Osiris very loudly and in an extended fashion that's can really kind of become an iconic display of grief and lamentation and set the bar for funerals for thousands of years in Egypt.
Great.
And it's Isis in the form of a bird, again with those wings, who scours the earth to find Osiris. It's Isis, possibly with the help of Thoth, or maybe Sobek, who resuscitated Osiris, and then after Set again kills Osiris and dismembered him, at least in her version, it's Isis who hunts down the parts, with the exception of his member.
Yes.
But again, it's Isis who uses her magic to get around that anatomical inconvenience.
That's right.
And get herself pregnant with Horus. So, I imagine as this story gets told and retold, kind of the obvious centrality of Isis is kind of hard to miss, and likely pushes her more and more to the front of the pantheon, because she becomes more and more popular over this time.
Sure.
But even more than heroic efforts, on her frankly somewhat hapless husband's behalf, it's the period between the second death of Osiris and the contendings of Horus and Set that really kind of make Isis the popular figure that she eventually is going to become. So to set the scene here, Set has just killed her husband and the father of her unborn child for the second time.
Right.
And Set, again, the god of chaos, has made himself Pharaoh of Egypt and would undoubtedly kill said child with barely a second thought.
Sure.
So things are looking bad for Isis at this point. And then Thoth, god of wisdom, and her advisor, and according to Plutarch and some later traditions, actually her father, he advises her to go into hiding during her pregnancy and disguise herself as a mortal woman.
I see.
And so that's what she does, and she goes into that Fayum area, the marshy Nile Delta region, where the river lets out into the Mediterranean and hides out there. So eventually she does deliver Horus, and things are fine with that. But she has to keep on the move to keep ahead of Seth's agents. Now with a baby in tow, so she has to acquire some protection, which she does in the form of 7 scorpion deities that travel with her at this time. So she's dressed. So she's looking for shelter. She's dressed in rags. She's carrying a baby with 7 scorpions circling around her. And she goes up to this residence of a wealthy woman in this village and asks for shelter. But the woman takes one look at this motley and venomous crew and says, no thanks. Closes the door, puts out the no solicitation sign.
Right.
But across the street is a poor woman who sees this, and she's a little more generous and a little more scorpion friendly, I guess. Sure. So she invites Isis and the crew in. So all would be good, but the scorpion ringleader, who's a scorpion god named Tefn, decides that this diss to Isis or this anti-scorpion bias will not stand. So he gets the rest of the other 6 scorpions to give him some of their venom to boost him up in strength. And then he breaks into the rich lady's house and stings her son, bringing the child to near death, in order to teach her a lesson about not letting scorpions into your house.
How else would they learn? Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So, but luckily for the kid and the lady, she starts screaming, but Isis is much more forgiving than the scorpions. So she finds the boy and uses a magic spell to pull the poison out of the kid and save the child.
Nice.
And so now the rich woman, she realizes, it was a goddess that I turned away. And she's very chagrined, embarrassed. So she gives all of her wealth to the poor woman from across the street.
Wow.
Who helped Isis, maybe with a little trust fund for the kid, so he can go to Memphis University or something like that. But that detail's not in there. But but this story and then there's similar ones from this time, it always show Isis as vulnerable, as a healer, as a wanderer, and as a friend to the poor in Egypt. So. And that's kind of what brings her a lot of this popularity that she's going to have. Now, another constant of Isis is that she's very clever and just a little bit of a trickster. So at some point, and it's hard to say when, Isis wanted something from Ra that he wasn't giving her. So one version is that Ra was flying the solar bark too close to the Earth and making the Earth too hot and everyone miserable.
Sure.
And she needed to get him to back it up a little bit. More commonly, it's either because she needed help getting pregnant with her twice dead, mutilated husband, or because she wanted to gain power for baby Horus after he was born.
Sure.
And we can take our pick. I think any of the 3 reasons would be consistent with Isis' character.
Agreed.
I sort of lean to the protecting Horus one, because we've heard a lot about Isis's post-mortem pregnancy, and usually the story of Ra helping out isn't in there. With the solar bark, we also know that Ra really wasn't directly captaining the ship. It was Thoth and Mahat, the goddess of divine order. So those deities seem like pretty steady hands, like they're not going to fly too low just for a joyride. Right. So, and we do know that Isis had plenty of ambition for herself and certainly for her son.
Yes.
So in any case, you'll recall that Ra takes that daily journey across the sky, and as he does so, he ages every day, starting out as a newborn in the morning and a very, very old man by sunset.
Right.
Right. And we know that at times, some very elderly people, have a little trouble controlling their mouths, and that can lead to a little bit of drooling.
Sure.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So, And this is apparently what was the case with Ra as we get towards sunset.
Hmm.
It gets a little bit drooly
Okay.
as he's slipping into the duat, into the underworld.
Right.
Now, Isis noticed this, and she sees like a pool of Ra's saliva had fallen into the dirt. And so she's thinking quickly. She forms a plan. She mixes that divine saliva with the dirt into make a clay, and she forms the clay into a hooded cobra.
Oh.
Now, it's important to note that Isis doesn't need to use her own magic to do this. The cobra comes to life based on the divine power in Ra's saliva, which of course we've seen many times. Created the Nile, created the other gods with different bodily fluids. So
yes, Egyptians are
in this
big fans
case,
of divine bodily fluids, really taking on a life of their own.
yes, and in this case, the life of its own is a snake.
Yes.
And so she places the spit cobra. She, travels all night and places it along the very start of his morning path. And so in this story called The Name of Ra, we get this. In the morning came Ra and his train in their glory, journeying to the western horizon. And the serpent shot out its pointed head, which was shaped like a dart, and its fangs sank into the flesh of Ra, and the fire of its poison entered into the god, for the divine substance was in the serpent. Ra cried out, and his cry rang through the heavens from the eastern to the western horizon. Along the earth it rang, and gods and men alike heard the cry of Ra. So the poison starts to work through Ra, and he's just in agony. He's feverish. He has the chills. And because this snake venom is derived from Ra's own power, it is the worst thing he has ever felt.
Goodness.
And so he calls all the gods with some power of healing for help. And this, of course, includes Isis. And this is part of her plan. So Isis looks over Ra and says, "Oh, wow, this looks pretty bad. I wonder what happened here." But it's so bad. I think the only way I can cure you is if you tell me your secret true name.
Oh.
Now, Ra's secret name is a big deal. The Egyptians thought that a magician would need to know your secret true name in order to be able to cast any spells against you, for example. And of course, this is the true name of the ultimate powerful creator deity. So at first, even though he's in agony, Ra is very reluctant and he resists telling her. But she's saying, nothing I can do unless you tell me your true name.
Yeah.
So eventually, the pain's too great, and he has no choice. So he clears everyone else off of the sunboat, off the solar bark, and calls Isis in. So just she will be the only person to hear this, only deity. And he let his true name pass from his heart to Isis's heart. And so back in the text, we get, when the name came forth from the heart of Ra to pass to the heart of Isis, the goddess spoke to Ra and said, "Bind thyself with an oath, O Ra, that thou wilt give thy 2 eyes unto Horus. And now the 2 eyes of Ra, that are the sun and the moon, and men call them the eyes of Horus to this day." So when we get to Horus, we'll find that he has this association, has some sort of power with the sun and the moon, and it is from, at least according to this story, his mother's trick on Ra. So
because his mother shook down the most powerful god in the universe with the with her own, with the disease of his own spit snake. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. She does cure Ra, but from there on, she retains some power over him because she is the only entity that knows his true name.
Right.
In the universe. So again, where others may have been a bit grossed out seeing some drool lying on the ground, Isis saw an opportunity and she took it ruthlessly.
Smart. And that does make a lot more sense for the benefit of her son than it would just because it's hot out. That feels like an elaborate plan for just saying cool it down a little bit.
Yeah, it does. So so another little story about Isis' ingenuity and her advocacy for Horus. So at the start of the contendings of Horus and Set, when they're starting this trial to see who's going to rule Egypt, the judges decided to move the trial off to an island in the middle of the Nile, kind of sequester the jury,
Right.
remove any outside interference.
Away from the media. Yeah.
Yeah. But Isis doesn't let that stop her. So she bribes the ferryman to bring her over as well, and then disguises herself as a beautiful mortal woman in order to get Set to fall in love with her, which he does. And then she tells him this tragic story of her son being dispossessed of his cattle by a squatter after her mortal husband has died. And Set, failing to recognize the thinly veiled parallels with his own story,
yes,
declares that this is just a total outrage and he's going to defend her son. But Isis then reveals herself and turns herself into a kite and flies off to tell the judges that Set has admitted that he's in the wrong. But unfortunately, this Perry Mason moment doesn't really go anywhere.
Probably not admissible in court either, under false pretenses.
Yeah, well, maybe, but someone suggests maybe they should have a breath holding contest as hippos, which
the rest is history.
Obviously, everybody jumps on that idea.
Yeah, far more legally sound. Yeah,
yeah. What about that's a better way to pick a hippo, or to pick a pharaoh. So, in that hippo episode, though, we know that Isis again inserts herself, throwing that harpoon at Set, and it hitting her son Horus, but eventually hitting Set.
Right.
But she does spare him, as you'll recall, getting her head chopped off by her son Horus for her trouble.
Yes.
But in one version, I don't think this was mentioned last episode, her head was actually replaced with a cow's head.
Oh, really?
At least temporary. That was all that Thoth could find lying around, and so he just
you got to put something on there.
on it. Okay. Yeah. Now she's not often pictured that way, so we have to think that that was more of a temporary solution. Now, eventually, of course, Horus does defeat Set, and he becomes pharaoh of Egypt. Isis herself continues to have a number of roles after the Osiris Set Horus myth cycle. She becomes a protector of women and children. She becomes the leading healing deity in Egypt. She's also a protector of the souls in the Duat. And then in later Ptolemaic era, Isis actually gets a new husband. So she has a second husband who the underworld and wealth deity Serapis. So she gets married to him. So
that's an interesting choice because of course her first husband Osiris is sort of shipped off to the underworld.
Yes,
down there in retirement. So he's down there shortly after he's reconstituted. 80 years go by in the contendings of Horus and Set. So she's been essentially on her own for quite a while. But then to hook up with a guy who's essentially the co-worker of the first in the underworld, it's a bold choice.
Yeah, I think he's got more of a day pass, goes back and forth. So I guess that works out. But now she was also by far the most successful crossover deity from the Egyptian pantheon. So for example, the Roman novelist Publius Lucius, writing in the 2nd century CE for his novel The Golden Ass, has his character, the main character who spends the better part of the book trapped as a donkey after a botched spell that was supposed to transform him into a bird, turns him into a donkey instead. So, we've all been there. So
sure, I mean,
who hasn't? However, he is finally saved from this predicament when one night before bed, as a donkey, he prays to Isis, and his prayers is answered by the goddess in a dream. And in the dream, Isis rises out of the sea with the light of the moon shining on her forehead, carrying serpents in one hand and sheaves of grain in the other. So, your typical beachside stroll with your serpents and grain.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
But she announces herself as a goddess known by many names, but chief among them Isis. And from the novel, she says, "The Phrygians call me the mother of gods, the the Athenians Minerva, the Cyprians Venus, some Juno, others Hecate, but principally the Ethiopians in the east and the Egyptians who are excellent in all manner of doctrine and who worship me by the proper ceremonies call me Queen Isis. So she has become kind of a catch-all deity, but known as Isis. So then she tells him how to get a rose, which is what he needs to do is eat a rose to reverse the spell. And one of her priests hands it to him the next day, and afterwards he dedicates himself to the mystery cult of Isis. So again, we have many roles for Isis: goddess of healing, magic, motherhood, which sounds like an expensive retreat weekend, but is in fact a candidate for a spot in the quest for the golden ale.
Very nice. Interesting. Wow. So where the first segment had a god who was sort of becoming other gods and fusing with them, here you had Isis essentially over time having a reputation that was borrowed by other cultures and sort of became Isis was still her core, but interesting. So a couple of real collectors here in different ways.
Yeah. Very interesting. A couple of climbers.
Did not have that sense of Isis being as much of a trickster as those stories would reveal.
Yeah, no, she had that side for sure.
I like it. Very good. Well done. Well, this should be an interesting matchup as we get into our rounds. So let's do that right on the other side of this little break.
All right. And we are back for our categories. We have 5 categories that are going to decide which one of these gods moves on to the final rounds with a chance to get that golden ale and eventually come back and help us save this troubled world. So, first category is immortal combat. And that is, again, a physical confrontation between the two deities and who would win. So, now outright physical violence is not really Isis's thing. She's certainly willing to throw a magic harpoon every once in a while.
Sure, with questionable aim sometimes, but yes, willing to throw it.
Yeah, even if her aim's not the greatest, but and in that story again, she didn't finish the job because it was her brother she was attacking, even though it was her brother who had already killed her husband and was trying to kill her son. So,
but I'm your brother. Help me out, and it worked.
Yeah, yeah. And so she does lack a little bit of the killer instinct.
Yes.
She can turn into a kite, which is a very mobile bird.
Mm-hmm.
So some mobility there, but I don't know how much that gets you. Now when we talk about entourage, she did have those 7 deadly scorpions.
Scorpions, yeah.
Who are capable of almost killing a child when you combine their power together.
When that's with extra venom. So yeah.
So yeah. But again, she is very crafty and clever.
Yes.
And she certainly, I think, would be capable of setting a very clever trap and getting away with it. Of course, we saw that with setting the trap for Ra. And in some ways, she actually reminds me of Hephaestus, Vulcan Hephaestus.
Oh yeah,
from the Greco-Roman series, who wasn't one for physical confrontation, but absolutely you would not want to be in a long-term feud. With him, and I think that goes for Isis.
Yes.
However, if you'll recall that he did not win his Immortal Combat round. So this is good, some good and bad, but
Interesting.
We'll see how it goes. We think that Sobek would be all right in this category.
Sobek's pretty strong in the category. I mean, known as his great protector, symbolic of the military, so synonymous with the fighting forces. In terms of willingness, clearly willing to get what he wants, whether it's through stealing stuff, whether it's through sexual coercion, having a meal during lovemaking, whatever he wants, he is willing to go get it. He also has magic as his disposal, as does Isis. So he also has control over all water, which is kind of interesting. So because he created and arose out of the Nile, he has these powers to control water. I didn't mention that, but that is an interesting sort of bit of the tool set if he needs it. Also, the question here, does he also get the powers of the gods that he merges with? So it depends where this confrontation takes place. So if he is in his Horus phase, does he also have the ability to use a falcon head along with his crocodile powers? Does he take on, say, the willingness to decapitate his own mother? Because that would be very relevant in this confrontation, because Isis would be that mother. So if he does take on those powers of the mergee, that could be kind of a death blow. Also, I have to think, because he's depicted not just as a guy with a crocodile head, but often the whole crocodile. He must have the same skills that a crocodile would have. So he can do weird stuff. He can sleep with one eye open like crocodiles can. He can stay underwater for a whole hour if he wants to.
Yeah.
He can go without a meal for a whole year. So all those crocodile talents are built into his part and parcel. Probably the biggest one, though, the one that takes it over the edge, the jaws of a crocodile can apply 5,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. And that is the strongest bite of any animal on the earth. So,
wow. I didn't know that.
If nothing else, if you take away the scorpions, if you take away the willingness to fight, that is a very, very lethal death blow from the snout of the crocodile. So all those things combined, with all due respect to Isis and her craftiness and her magical capabilities, I think the magic of Sobek kind of evens those out, and these extra crocodile powers, along with that secret water power, I think that would give him the edge. So I think he takes the vote in this round for me.
All right. Well, I think there are two things that stand out for me with him. One is obviously that powerful bite, and I did not know that was the most powerful bite. But I think you gotta get some points for that. And then also he has that kind of Wonder Twin powers to control water.
Yes.
Now, if you'll recall from the 70s cartoon or 80s cartoon, the Wonder Twin powers, he would often use it to form ice.
That's right. Yes.
But I don't know that the Egyptians were that familiar with ice, living in sort of that subtropical area before refrigeration. So he probably didn't use that one too much. But still, I think I gotta go with Sobek on this one, that he is the winner of Immortal Kombat.
Yes.
All right, very good. So let's see if I put these in the right order this time. And then we have curriculum deity.
Yes.
Which is who would you rather be? Who would you rather worship? Which god has that it factor?
Yeah.
And as is tradition, I think you go first in this one.
Yeah. So being Sobek's a hard one, because you seem most of the time like kind of a vicious, entitled jerk, really. I mean, really just a rough personality. On the other hand, what would it be like to actually be a crocodile? And here's where, again, there are pros and cons,
right?
At least from where I'm sitting. So you can live to be as old as 75 years old. All right. Not bad. Could be better, but not bad. Crocodiles are carnivores. They're eating mammals, birds, and fish, which I already do. So not much adjustment there. Sounds good. Crocodiles have excellent hearing and eyesight, which I most certainly do not. So that's a step up. And they're also very fast. They can swim up to 22 miles per hour. They can run up to 11 miles per hour. That's got to vastly outpace anything I could do. But you think they're hard of emotion. They're not emotional creatures. So yes, a lot of physical strength. Well, you've heard the phrase crocodile tears, where you're sort of crying, but it appears insincere. It turns out crocodiles do actually weep when they're eating their prey, but it is not emotional. It's strictly for biological reasons, because there's a lot of hissing and huffing involved. It requires physical exertion that causes the tears to flow. But when I eat something really good, I do occasionally weep emotionally. So I could get used to that too. So B is a bit of a mixed bag, but a lot more pros than I would have thought in purely the crocodile department. In terms of worshiping, pretty good. As I said, very popular. So lots of cult centers, lots of existing artwork, sculptures. The priests are working hard. You've got song cycles you can sing. So there's sort of a built-in sort of musical aspect to the worship. if one wants to take on a hobby, the opportunity to make mummies of crocodiles and crocodile eggs, great way to sort of dabble in animal husbandry, mummifying. If you want some arts and crafts, could be a good sort of stress release.
Yeah.
And the fact is, in terms of if you're going to choose who to worship, he was a winner. He kept doing better and better, kept getting stronger and stronger. So if as the world got complicated, if you needed protection from this troubled world, he was a good way to go. So I think Sobek scores pretty highly on worshiping. So yeah, I'd say pros and cons, but pretty decent on B, and pretty hard cut thumbs up for worship.
All right, interesting. All right, so Isis, she has a bit of a mixed bag of a life. So she started off with a seemingly good marriage. Osiris, by all accounts, was a kind, wise, charismatic
Right.
figure. But then, that husband is assassinated multiple times. And she has that extended period of danger and wondering. But ultimately, Isis does end up being triumphant with her and increasing her own power. She, of course, could turn into pretty much any animal, but her go-to animal was the kite, which is a bird of prey, kind of a hawk with a piercing, mournful cry. And Egyptian kites, according to the Wonder of Birds website, says that this bird is a great thief and makes much havoc among poultry.
Oh.
It is a robber of other birds, and if it happens to see a weaker bird with food, it is sure to attack and rob it. It is fond of society of man and has been known to haunt the villages of East Asia in great numbers for the purpose of letting offal, which is discarded organ meat,
right,
which may be flung into the streets.
Okay.
So so she could do that. If you want to hang out, rob some other birds, eat some offal, she's got that. Now she has her role as a healer and helper in the underworld of deserving souls, and eventually finding her own wealthy Greek second husband, much like Jackie Onassis.
Right.
So some interesting points there. Good and bad. It's the the ultimate victory of seeing her son triumphant and on the throne, but has a lot of hardship. So in terms of worship, it's interesting there because it changes quite a bit as time goes on. From the speculation about her being worshipped as a deified chair in the earliest days, to really kind of a universal goddess later on. One long-term role was in mourning. So there was the lamentations of Nephthys and Isis after the death of Osiris, which was quite iconic. And as part of the Osiris mysteries, which would be performed every year at temples, they would employ two beautiful young women to play Nephthys and Isis, perform all day long recitation of wailing and lamentation to the dead King Cyrus, intended to rouse his spirit back from the underworld. So you can imagine that this was a hearty cry and the song.
Sounds exhausting.
Yes, to raise the dead. So and normal funerals would have an abbreviated version of this, where there is, again, designed to wake the dead person's soul in order to move them onto the afterlife, because there was viewed as some kind of risk that the soul would just hit the snooze button once too often through death and miss the bus to go to the afterlife. So you needed to have these singers there. I think that transfer of her gift, not just bringing Osiris back, but passing that gift on to deserving mortals was kind of a big aspect of her worship.
Yeah.
And so they would, hope to have her give them that magical protection. And there was like songs about having her give the breath back into your nose. So, then if you hear that from her, you're in. So She was worshipped in temples along with Osiris, where they shared their worship. But in the later days, she had her own mystery cult that, again, spreads across the entire Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And in that 2nd century book by Apuleius, he described her festival as a parade with a party-like atmosphere. Everyone's in fancy dress costumes, and that is preceding a more serious procession with an Isis statue, all culminating in an evening party on the beach as the priests then load the gifts and sail off to the temple of Isis.
I mean, that sounds a lot more fun than just waiting for the sacred crocodile to die so you can wrap it up as a mummy.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's maybe a little better aspect than the funeral version of Isis. So this is an interesting one.
So one thing you did not mention in this episode, but I think it came up in the last, if I recall, is that when Osiris was out on his whirlwind tour, his cultural tour of Europe and Asia and such, when Osiris was out, Isis was in charge. So she actually was essentially the acting king of Egypt for some time, some years. So on top of that stellar resume, was also essentially the leader of the country. Certainly shattering a glass ceiling, if you like, in ancient Egypt, sure. So add that to her repertoire, and that's impressive.
Yeah, that's true. I did fail to mention that one. So I think I am gonna go with Isis in this one. I think it's close. The being a crocodile is interesting, certainly, but I think I'm gonna go with Isis on this one.
Yeah, I think I agree with that vote. I think there's certainly some ups and downs in Isis's story. She went through a lot, but accomplished a great deal, came out ahead.
Yeah.
Even on the worshiping front, it feels like much more dimensional, teaching people grief, giving protection in a much more sort of meaningful way than just, I'm scared of that crocodile. I hope he protects me from other crocodiles. So yeah, Isis gets my vote on the second round.
All right. So we are tied up 1-1 as we come into the third category, which is good God. So which again is just character. Who is the better being, and we'll see how this one goes. But I do think that Isis is a little bit of a classic mixed bag here, because as the devoted wife of Osiris, I think we have to give her credit there. She was forgiving again of her sister Nephthys, who you will recall to some degree kicks off the whole Osiris tragedy by disguising herself as her sister in order to sleep with her brother.
That's right.
So, therefore, humiliating her husband, who is also her other brother, Set. So,
it's complicated.
Bad move there by Nephthys, but she is forgiven by Isis.
Yep.
She saves that little rich boy after the scorpion bodyguards get a little bit out of hand. So class move there.
Yeah,
I think. Both Isis and Horus, were not above bending the rules in their contests with Set. But I think we need to cut them a bit of slack, because what a bad ruler and sort of fratricidal jerk Set was,
for sure.
That maybe the ends did justify the means, but they were not not above bending the rules themselves. And I think the big black mark against her is, she did raw a little dirty with the old spit snake trick.
Yes.
Her motives, whatever they were, maybe were a little bit selfish. To kind of play that kind of trick on the creator deity. So I think that's the one point where she gets points off. Otherwise, she was, good to the poor, a healer, magician, but she could have a little bit of a dark side too.
Yeah. I think Sobek was not a terribly likable fellow. Let's put it that way. I think really sort of got what he wanted. Yes, everything was a mixed bag. Yes, he offered protection, but he was also responsible for creating all the scary stuff he needed protection from. Not unlike Isis and the sort of the snake situation, where She provides the comfort for the disease that she herself caused.
Right.
There are some upward parts as on the other part of the mixed bag with Sobek. So, of course, he helped put Osiris back together again, depending on which version of the story you hear. But he was given credit for that. And of course, as a version of Ra, he got credit not just for being the creator of gods and people, but also helping perform that ultimate task that you mentioned of making the sun go up and down every day. Meaningful work. So we had that in his life.
Yeah.
Although it does seem worth pointing out that it feels like every episode has certain other figures who are involved in that whole sunbark thing. So this is very much more of a group effort. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's a team sport.
I don't recall Helios having that much help in season 1. He was sort of, maybe his ne'er-do-well son for a little while, but that didn't end well. So
no.
Even in the Ra percentage, he still seemed to have had a lot of help. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of neutralizing here between the two. I think even with Isis being pretty sneaky, I think her motivations, while questionable, were still coming from a decent place. I can respect wanting to give your son a leg up. I can certainly respect if it's a little warm out, wanting to put the AC on and pressure, But I think to her credit, and maybe this is a part of character too, she goes straight after Ra. I mean, she's not messing around with underlings. She's coming straight from the camp of the wire. You come at the king, you best not miss.
All right. No,
she pulls it off. So I give her points for that. So I think given the many character defects of Sobek, with a few little shiny parts on the edges, I think Isis gets my vote. While complicated, I think she has the better character.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think overall, she does pretty well. She had to take she had to take that shot at Ra for the family.
That's right.
For the family.
That's right.
Or to fight the first version of global warming.
There you go.
Who
knows how bad things would be now if she hadn't accomplished that.
Yeah, exactly. So all right. I think we're giving that one to her, and that gives us 2 to 1, and takes us on to iconography. So I think you're gonna go first in this one, and iconography is again the better legacy.
Yes.
That lives with us today. So
yes.
What do you have on Sobek?
And a reminder that in season 2, the legacies of these Egyptian figures aren't quite as rich and plentiful as maybe some of those Greco-Roman styles. Sure. So sometimes we got to reach a little bit. But I have to point out, and this has been nagging at me the whole time, seeing the name Sobek has constantly reminded me of the character Walter Sobchak, who of course is the John Goodman character from The Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
And like Sobek, has a bit of a temper, is a little bit prone to destruction. So I don't see it's technically part of that legacy, but I still see them as at least cousins. Sobek is a very minor character in a DC Comics series, so still recognizably with the crocodile head. Hangs out with Black Adam, who of course is the guy from the Dwayne Johnson movie that nobody saw, but he's sort of that entourage. He was sort of a pet at first, but then becomes more powerful. He eventually rises in the comic book series to also become the 4th horseman of the apocalypse for some reason, which is famine. An odd choice considering his own dietary habits, which are robust. But for whatever reason in this comic book series, he gets promoted up to a horseman of the apocalypse. There is a type of moth found in Oregon called the Simpistus Sobek. Don't have anything else to say on that, but it's a moth. This is now I'm going to delve into some of your favorite departments here a little bit. There is a book called Sobek on Amazon. It's a novel. It's classified under the genre dark, gay, romantic suspense, which very specific genre. I will admit I did not investigate further into the book, mainly because I didn't want to tip off the Amazon algorithm to surface some previously browsed items in the Amazon account that I share with my wife. There's a lot of explanation there I'd rather avoid. So I did see the cover. It's part of a series called Malicious Gods of Egypt. And all I saw on the cover was just a shirtless man who is so muscular he can barely fit on the cover of the book. Not even a crocodile head in sight. So they're barely even trying. But there is this installation in what we'll loosely call literature in that series. Sobek is a brand of brown leather desktop humidors. Very important when you need to have your cigar not only at the right humidity, but also within instant arm's reach. And again, right from your neck of the woods, the Sobek is the name of an all-terrain karambit knife from a company called Opus Knives and Design, because the blade resembles a crocodile head.
Oh,
And
nice.
unsurprisingly, it comes with a very good looking holster. So
Nice.
good holster game in terms of legacy here. Sadly, because we have to fold in the crocodile as an animal, some not great examples here. Elton John, Crocodile Rock, probably the worst Elton John song. It's definitely the worst, bottom three. The worst footwear are those plastic monstrosities known as Crocs. So very bottom of the barrel for both of those. But on the plus side, we'll end with a historical figure, Joseph Sobek, who was the inventor of racquetball. Not only that, but the first person inducted into the Racquetball Hall of Fame, which I would say seems fitting.
Yeah.
So a bit of a eclectic mix of but so knives, racquetball, uh, dark, gay, romantic suspense. It's all there.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Some interesting things there. So as I said, I'm just back from London as we're recording this. So start with a fact from England. And it's this double fact here that the reserve rowing crew for Oxford University is called ISIS.
Really?
After a section of the Thames River that is called the ISIS. So there's a section of the Thames called ISIS, and the reserve rowing crew for Oxford University is named after that.
All right.
Now, musically, because there is the song "ISIS" by Bob Dylan, which is not a well-known song, but
No.
is one of his 70s hits, I believe, or hits, one of his 70s songs, I believe. And then there is ISIS the band, and this is a former band from Boston, Massachusetts. Is a post-metal band. The band borrowed from and helped evolve the post-metal sound pioneered by such bands as Neurosis and Godflesh, characterized by lengthy songs that focus on repetition.
Okay.
So if you want to have a lengthy repetitious song, you can kind of look those guys up.
Post metal. Okay.
And I did not do that for different reasons, but I also didn't want the Spotify algorithm to learn anything about that.
You're right.
So Squishmallows makes an ISIS spotted seal stuffed super plush toy.
Oh.
So there's a Squishmallow stuffed ISIS spotted seal. So then we had a Denver connection in the last episode, you'll recall, in iconography with Thoth, and a group there had a correspondence course.
That's right.
And this is another Denver connection. That the goddess Isis Books and Gifts is a store in Denver, and it has been, quote, a premier metaphysical source on the World Wide Web and in Denver for over 40 years. At Goddess Isis Books, all world spiritual traditions and healing methods are honored as we seek to bring ancient wisdom into the modern world. Part library, part apothecary, part temple. We provide all the tools for your soul's journey.
Wow.
Books, oracles, crystals, singing bowls, native drums, sacred art, so on and so on. At ISIS, we have everything from angels to Zen. So
impressive.
Very impressive. Another Denver connection. So there is an ISIS perfume line, and that is made by the fine people at Perfume Lion. And again, in that vein, there are the ISIS Fashion Awards, which is an award show, a fashion award show for accessories only. No clothing. So there is an ISIS brand of candied cherry tomatoes.
All right.
Something. And then there was and I don't know if you ever heard of this. There's the Mysteries of Isis, which was a live action superhero show that ran for one season, 1975 to 1976, on Saturday mornings, I believe. And then I will say that back to the names, that the name Isis started to appear as a first name for girls in the U.S. in the 1970s and slowly gained kind of a modest popularity up until about 2015.
Yeah.
And then unaccountably dropped precipitously.
Yeah, I wonder why.
And perhaps coincidentally, that there was a group in Syria known as ISIS, which was a fanatical terrorist group, but that was an anagram for something which I forget what it was, but was not actually from the goddess Isis, which one would assume as they were very, very much not of that tradition. So
no. And I remember that group was also known as ISIL by some.
Yes, the Obama administration always made
I always assumed that President Obama was just being careful to protect the reputation of the goddess Isis.
Yes,
in that preference, to his credit.
Yeah, to his credit, yeah, for sure. So, both some interesting things there. Isis, she did have that network television show. But only lasted one season.
I can't say that was a little before my time. I was probably more Sesame Street Electric Company at that phase.
In preparation for this, I did watch the pilot episode on YouTube.
Okay.
Of that.
Did it feel like a one and done type of show?
It felt like maybe 22 episodes was 21 episodes too long for that. But we may see some inspiration from that show up in just a minute here.
There you go.
So yeah, I think I am gonna have to go with ISIS again on this one. Both not stellar, but they were like, really never saw at any point the name Sobek take off.
I think that's right. I think ISIS gets the edge, and I was a little surprised because I kind of vaguely remember when the Syrian group came up, the terrorist group. I remember seeing articles. There were lots of businesses, ISIS florists and small businesses named after the goddess that really got into trouble for having that name.
Right.
In the same way that if you had like, the COVID butcher shop a few years later, you might want to consider rebranding. But good to hear that all those ISIS branded things are still doing fine. Even still hiccup.
They're still around.
Yeah.
I will say the name ISIS has started to trickle back up. So I think she's going to outlive that group and just be fine.
I mean, ISIS lost, didn't they? Didn't we beat them?
Yeah, they're pretty much gone from my understanding. Yeah.
Well, then let's bring it back.
Yeah.
Bring ISIS's return. Let's bring it.
Right. So we that puts us at 3-1. So ISIS has secured the victory.
Yes.
But we still have one round to go, and that is the ever popular, ever important, critical matinee idol, where we decide who would make the better movie or limited series. And I'm going to go first on this one. And I think that Secrets of ISIS, as I said, I watched the pilot episode, and it did lay some groundwork for me. And in the show, it is Egyptologist who discovers an amulet of Isis, and that gives her the powers of Isis. But so I'm going to take it a little bit a different route. But starting from there, it is a modern day Egyptologist, but she's like Isis, a single mother. And she has a son with a disturbingly falcon-like head. Not an actual falcon head, but just you look at him from the wrong angle.
Yeah. Falcon-esque.
Beaky. Eyes are on different sides of his head.
Beaky.
But with that, in addition to that challenge, she is stung by a magical scorpion while on a dig and transformed into the goddess. So, and that scorpion then stays on as a lethal helper and comic relief on the show. But staying on brand for Isis, she still leads that double life as a struggling mortal single mother, balancing work, motherhood, and fighting the forces of chaos. So, first episode, in her archaeologist job, she's, have her negotiating the return of some ill-gotten Egyptian artifacts to be repatriated to Egypt out of a London museum. But, negotiations hit a bit of a snag. But meanwhile, the coronation of the new King Charles is set to take place.
Oh, timely.
Yes, but Isis learns of a plot by some neo-Puritans to kill the king and declare a second Puritan republic in England.
That can't happen.
But Isis, as we know, is a diehard royalist.
Yeah,
Her name means throne, after all.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yep.
And no fan of the Christian Puritans, I would imagine. So she steps in, and with the help of her scorpion sidekick, dramatically saves the day in the middle of the coronation, crushing the Puritan rebellion. So then, returning to her mortal work the next day, somehow no one notices that she looks just like the magic wielding goddess that saved the royal family on international television the day before, because she is, after all, wearing glasses.
Yeah, so, of course.
Who could tell?
No.
But the newfound respect of ancient Egypt in the wake of those dramatic events is able to get the artifacts that she was after and return them to Egypt for the happy conclusion of the first episode. And I was thinking Ana de Armas would be perfect for the role of Isis.
Absolutely. Sign me up.
So action figure. So that's what I got.
Very nice. God save the king, and rip from the headlines, as it were.
Yes. Well, hopefully not.
Well, yes. At least the event. Certainly not the Neo-Puritan Revolution.
Right.
Excellent. Well, without for Sobek, for Matt and Adam, we dip back into the romantic comedy, the time-honored tradition of romantic tales. We know the kind of story where certain women typically are the protagonists. They're unlucky in love because they can't help but wonder if their suitors are interested in their minds or merely their bodies. But we're going to switch that around a little bit, and we're going to put that type of story on Sobek. So it's a twist on that tale. And we're going to encounter Sobek as a, single guy in his attempts to navigate life and love in modern day New York City, which of course has two different rivers. So he'd feel very comfortable there, very much at home. And we follow on his romantic travails as he looks for a mate who will love him, not for his crocodile exterior, but what's on the inside instead. So at first he tries to date an attractive young dentist, and first they hit it off well, but eventually it becomes clear that she's mostly interested not in his personality, but in his teeth. After all, as a crocodile, of course, he's got some of the sharpest teeth in nature, and he does not use them to chew his food because they only go up and down, not sideways. So he has to swallow his food whole without chewing it. She's also drawn to the fact that a typical crocodile goes through 4,000 teeth in a lifetime, which is kind of a dentist's dream. So soon realizes that's not going to be a match. So next, he falls for a beautiful chef who works at a Michelin star restaurant. Again, starts really promisingly, but eventually it's very clear she's not taken by his dry sense of humor or his sense of style, but rather his practice of eating her delicate creations in the midst of their lovemaking. He can't help but do both. So at long last, Sobek is really trying, but he forms a relationship at last with a sexy cardiologist. Very promising. And she actually admits she desires him not for his gruff exterior, not for his idiosyncratic habits, but for his heart. And just when it looks like he's finally going to land love, her true motivation is revealed. She is, in fact, the cardiologist interested in his crocodile heart, all right, but only because, unlike that of other reptiles, it has not 3 but 4 chambers. So tragically, she is in fact smitten with his 2 atria and 2 ventricles, not the emotions that are stirred by them. So while, yes, that complex blood circulation system is great for staying underwater for long periods of time, it ends up being just one more distraction from finding the woman of his dreams. And those episodes continue week after week. So tune in, keep one eye open, if you will, for Crock of Love, a romantic tragedy coming to National Geographic after hours this summer.
Excellent. Wow.
Yeah, just romance plus crocodile facts. Can't lose.
Yes. Yeah, that's an interesting take on that. Yeah.
Yes, unexpected. So I don't know. I'm torn on this one. Both pretty promising. Both action packed in their own ways.
Yeah.
I suspect yours would make better television. I think.
Well, you throw Bonnie Prince Charlie in there, you know.
Yeah, that's right. That's ratings gold out of the gate. So I think I will give the nod to ISIS on that one.
You know, I'll split the vote. So we'll split the vote on that. So we'll place that one as a tie. We'll give the lovelorn Sobek a vote, and that brings us 3-1-1 with ISIS coming out on top, but a game effort by Sobek there.
He went down chopping. Let's put it that way. Well, so the Golden Ale rightly goes to ISIS in a relatively close finish, but certainly a hard-fought battle on both sides. We'll give it that. Very good. Well, I think that concludes our business for episode 4. So as always, excellent job, Andrew. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Andy Snow, who I had the pleasure of having a couple beers with last night, and he's doing well. Thanks for the theme music there. And of course, a reminder, you know where to find us. Tell your friends, write a good review, all those things.
Yeah.
The socials. Now you've got to go to the social media, go to the Twitter feed so you can see all these images that Andrew and I were describing. And of course, we are now on volume 2 also of the God versus God playlist. We're now in Rock Like an Egyptian, volume 2. So look for the link to that on the website. You can't beat it.
Coming out.
So Andrew, look forward to seeing you in the flesh very soon. In the meantime, folks, thank you for listening. And episode 5 should just be right around the corner once we're back from our travels and done visiting yet another pyramid.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, folks, for listening. We will see you soon.
Bye.